Hi everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Now today's soap is another 100% natural soap and I'm going to be using the same base recipe that I used in my last video if you saw my little Christmas pudding soaps. Now this recipe has been developed by Scott Granger, who's one of our cosmetic chemists in the UK. Well, I think he's actually based in France, but he does all our cosmetic assessments and things like that for us in the UK. And Scott has very kindly made this recipe available for everyone to use completely free of charge. So if you want to get a copy of the recipe yourself, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Bear in mind if you're looking to sell soaps in the EU, including the UK, using this recipe, remember you do need to purchase an assessment to go with this recipe. Just using the recipe won't entitle you to sell soaps, and I'll leave a link to that as well for you. Scott also has a really useful Facebook group where people involved in making cosmetics under EU regulations, including the UK at the moment, get together and discuss issues and legislation and all of the sort of things that surround our soap making in the UK. And, not surprisingly, I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. Now the reason I'm doing another natural recipe from this assessment is that this variant includes using a couple of different things that we've not used before. So it includes ginger, so we've seen some spices in our previous soap, but also this recipe has carrot and also honey in it. Now, all of my soaps are actually vegan and palm free. And if you actually sell vegan soaps yourself, then do bear in mind that you can't put honey in them because then that would stop them being vegan. Now, I've actually used vegan-friendly honey in my soaps, and that is something that is allowed in this assessment. Now, just before we get going making our soaps, I've got a little bit of an update for those of you following my boiler/heating issues. And last, we've got our boiler mended and we've got our heating and it's lovely and warm. I was going to do this intro in a bikini and a sun hat, but I thought none of you needed that inflicted on you. Come on, let's go and make some soap.
We're going to be using some carrot puree in this soap. Now, if you're looking to put a carrot puree in your soap, then obviously you can do what I'm doing here and just make it yourself. You can buy carrot puree, or you can also use baby food, which is potentially carrot puree. You just need to check, obviously, if you're buying some that's already made, that it is just pure carrot with no additives at all. Now, as you can see here, I'm actually using proper carrots, and this is going to be the cheapest way to get your carrot puree. So all I'm doing is just taking I've got just some nice, fresh, really nice, vibrant orange carrots. It is worth getting some decent carrots. You know, if you use those manky old ones that are laying at the bottom of your fridge and they've all gone a bit, rubbish and a bit pale, they're not going to give you the best colour in your soap. Okay, so all I've done here, as you can see, is I've peeled my carrots. Now I've actually done more than I need for this recipe because I'm actually going to make a couple of batches of this soap, and I do find it's easier to actually prepare more carrots rather than just the small amount that you need for one soap. And anyway, if you don't use them all in the soap, you can always just eat them as part of your dinner. So then we just need to chop up our carrots. I'm going to do mine nice and small, but the key thing that you need to bear in mind here is to try and chop them in a nice even size, just like if you were doing any sort of normal food preparation. If you have some bits much bigger than other bits, then you're going to end up with lumps in your puree. Try and keep them as even as possible so they'll cook and it'll all get soft at the same time. Now, I didn't show it on screen, but one of the things I did is once these carrots were all chopped up, I actually weighed them. And I did that because I wanted to know how much was carrot And when I go and cook them, I'm going to add some water. So therefore, when I get my final puree, I want to know how much of that puree is coming from the carrot and how much of it is coming from the water. I'm going to be gently boiling my carrots in some water. Now, it's up to you how you want to cook them. Some people might like to steam them. That way you're not actually adding much water to the carrots at all. What I'm going to do is add some water, but I'm going to use distilled water. That's probably not necessary, but I'm going to use the carrot cooking water in my soap as part of the replacement for the water that I would use for the lye, because that water will actually take on some of the colour from the carrots, and therefore I can use it to help me enhance that nice orange colour in my soap. So once they're all ready, I put in enough distilled water just to cover up those carrots. You don't want too much. Popped a lid on, and then I very gently cooked them. I left mine cooking for about 30 to 40 minutes on a nice gentle heat. You do want them to be nice and soft so that they puree nicely. Once the carrots were cooked, I allowed them to cool right down, and then I've just popped them into a blender. You can use any sort of blender. You could even use your stick blender that you use for your soap making, whatever you've got. You just want something that's going to really get these lovely and smooth, because you don't want any chunks of carrot in your soap. If you end up with the chunks of carrot, then obviously that's not going to saponify with the rest of the soap, and you risk that going rancid and going bad and mouldy and all that sort of stuff in your soap if you've actually got whole pieces of carrot in there. Now for my soap design, I want to have 3 distinct colours. So the first section I'm going to pour is going to have all of my ginger in and my honey. Now I want these sections to set up properly before pouring the next, so I'm going to make individual little batches of soap, and in the first one, because I want it entirely with the ginger, I'm just going to add the ginger to my base oils first of all and blend those into the oils and get them really blended nicely. I've just poured a little bit of my base oils into the container that I had the ginger in originally. Firstly, to try and get as much of it out as possible into my oils. And secondly, because I'm actually going to leave a little bit of this to kind of replicate, like you would do a mica drizzle on the top of the soap. So I'm just going to leave a tiny little bit for the end. And then once I'm happy that they're really thoroughly incorporated, so I'm not going to have any big speckles or lumps of spices or anything in the soap, I'm just going to add in my lye water as you normally would. Now do be a little bit careful if you're adding spices to a soap. They will accelerate your trace, so just be a little bit careful with how much you stick blend. I'm using a vegan honey in my soap. Now obviously if your soaps aren't vegan, you can just use normal honey. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got my oils and my lye nicely emulsified. And I'm going to make sure I bring them to sort of a reasonably light trace. Remember, I don't want to stick blend this too much because the spices are going to accelerate your batter and the honey will accelerate your batter as well. So don't get too blasé with the stick blender here. Then when I'm happy that I've got to a trace, I'm just going to weigh out the amount of honey that I can use. Now one thing to be careful of with your honey is it's quite a thick gloopy liquid, and therefore it's very easy, especially if you're at quite a light trace, for that gloopy liquid to just sink to the bottom of your jug and stick there in a big blob. So can you see how I sort of sprinkled mine lightly on the top to try and minimise the chances of that happening? And then you just need to really make sure that it's dispersed nicely in your batter. Give it a nice stir round so you make sure you've got none of that honey sticking to the bottom or the sides of your jug, and then a quick stick blend just to make sure it's dispersed properly. Remember, don't go too mad on that stick blender because you've got lots of things in this batter that are going to accelerate your trace. And then without too much mucking around, I'm just going to get it poured into my mould, which I've just got tilted on an angle. And can you see how fast this is actually thickening up? And in fact, because of the speed that this was actually thickening, I found it easier just to take my mould and take it off of its little cradle, just to be able to get the batter in there nice and easily. And then I could scoop it into the shape that I wanted it. Now the good thing with the batter when it thickens quite quickly is you don't have to wait very long before you can do your next layer, or in this case do your sculpted layer. So as you can see, I'm just going through and scraping this layer. And then I decide that I'm just scraping off too much. I'm one of these people that I do quite a lot of sculpted layers, but I hate the waste that they cause. I know you can always say, I'll bung that into a spare mould. I don't want all these spare moulds full of random soap around. So as you can see here, I actually change my mind and go, I don't like that. I plop that back in the mould, and then I just raise my scraper up and scrape it a little bit higher. Now, when you're going to scrape and try not to waste anything, it does make your scraping a little bit more time consuming, let's say, because what it means is you have to keep moving the batter around to make sure it fills all the bits that you want to scrape. So you will find that you have to maybe scrape, go in and fill in the gaps, scrape, go in and fill in the gaps again. But I'd much rather do that and use up almost all of my batter than have lots of it left over in these random extra soaps that I don't want. And you may be able to see I've just sort of popped in some little lolly sticks underneath the ends of my scraper so I can keep it nice and level as I go along. And there, for me, that's much better because I've pretty well got all of my soap in my mould. On to layer 2, and this is nice and easy. So I've just got some plain soap batter now and my lye solution. And once again, I'm just going to blend it, bring it to a trace, and then just simply pour it into the mould. And because this is just plain batter with nothing in it, I've got a little bit of time to blend it. It's not going to accelerate. It's just going to be nice and easy to work with. Now because this soap batter is nice and fluid, I'm just going to pour it with the soap mould level on my sideboard. And then I'll lift it up and put it onto the cradle to tilt it to the angle that I want. And to check out the angle that I want, I'm just going to put my scraper in against the soap. I know it's nowhere near set up yet, but I just want to make sure that it's roughly in the right area. And then once the layer is set up just enough to hold a shape, we'll scrape through again. And then with the excess I'm scraping out, apart from that very first bit I blobbed in that little mould tray, I'm actually putting it aside. Because it's plain soap batter, I'm just going to mix it into my next layer and use it in that top layer. Okay, last layer, and it's time for our carrots. Now I've just kept these sealed. I've kept them in the fridge overnight and then I've allowed them to come to room temperature. And now once again, because I'm just doing a solid colour layer, I'm going to add the carrots straight to my oil and give them a good blend in just to make sure I've completely removed any chances of any lumps going into my soap. Then do you remember I told you about that spare soap batter that I scraped off of that middle row? Well, that's what that sort of like cheesy looking stuff is. That will mix in fine into that fluid batter. So I'm just going to blend that in as well so I'm not wasting it. And then I'm going to add in my lye solution. Now, with my lye solution, I have discounted my water even further than I have for the rest of the soap. If you remember, when we made our carrot puree, I weighed the bare carrots, and then I also weighed my puree after I'd cooked it. And so I can see how much excess water was in the puree. And then what I've done is I've taken that water away from the water I needed in the lye solution for this batch. And what effect that will have is, first of all, it will stop this section of the batter being too wet. But really what I'm aiming for is I'm trying to swap orange coloured water that I created from boiling those carrots and remove some of the clear coloured water, so I enhance that carrot colour. So then just grabbing my mould, and as I looked in I realised I'd forgot to clean down the sides after I'd scraped off that white layer, so I'm just going to go through and give that a clean now, because I want each layer to be nice and clean on the outside with only the correct colour showing at the sides of the soap. And then we can just pour in our gorgeous carrot soap that we've got, and it really is a gorgeous colour, isn't it? I'm pouring this in at a reasonably light trace, just because I want it to flow into that scraped layer below, but also I want a nice level surface on the top. And then to finish my top off, do you remember that little bit of ginger that we saved mixed with some oil? I'm just going to treat that how you would do a mica drizzle on the top of your soap. So I'm just going to use a little pipette and blob it here and there on the top of the soap, and then give it a little swirl to finish off. And then when I've finished, I'll just treat it like I do all of my soap. I'm going to C-pop it. So into my preheated oven, heated to 70 degrees C, which is about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Turn the oven off as soon as the soap goes in there, and then I leave it to sit there overnight. And then here's our soap the next day, so let's have a look at the cut. I do find with my multi-bar cutter that it's easier for me to lay the soaps down on their sides. I know you'd normally do that if you have some botanicals on the top or something, but here where I'm having a tall and skinny soap, I just find it's just more balanced to have it laying down. So here's our first couple of bars, and I'm really pleased with those. I really like the design that I've got going on, and the colour difference is really quite dramatic considering we've got no micas or any other sorts of colouring in these. Remember that bottom layer was made with the ginger and the honey. The middle layer was just the pure plain soap batter, and the top layer was that carrot puree with then my little ginger drizzle on the top. And then here a picture of our finished soaps. I hope you liked the soap and that you've enjoyed the video. If you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!